So yesterday we were talking a little about Rabba's claim that he's a Beinoni. And Abaye told him that if you're a Beinoni, then there's no tzaddik in the world. And how could you consider yourself a Beinoni? So there's obviously some argument between Abaye, what he understands to be a Beinoni, and what Rabba understands to be a Beinoni, or at least how Rabba saw himself. But somehow Beinoni must be, if Rabba thought he's a Beinoni, must be some high level, not what we think of a Beinoni, which would be half sins and half mitzvahs. And then so one of the questions that was asked is that maybe he was just very humble. And so he thought of himself, I'm humble, I have sins. But you have to understand that there's real humility, and then there is foolish humility. Foolish humility is, you know that you're perfect, and you foolishly dream up of, I don't know, I might have done this sin, and that's it. That's nonsense. There's real humility is, you know who you are, you know what you've done, and yet you feel that you haven't done enough. If someone else had the talent and the energy that you have, they would have done a much better job. So you feel humble that you're not fulfilling, you're not reaching your highest potential, or you are reaching, you're not reaching your highest potential, and really you could do a lot more. And someone else might have done even more than you if they had your brain and your health and your talent. They maybe would have done much more. And so that is what real humility is. So in this case, this is absolutely not a case where he thinks he's doing half sins. You can't make such a mistake. Now, the Gemara that we just learned mentioned that that it's possible that sin, like even King David thought, maybe sin caused him not to be a chassid anymore. Maybe he's not going to merit to see the Olam Haba, the world to come. And what does that mean? That means that there were certain things that David HaMelech did that he felt maybe caused him to lose out. But he knew that he didn't do half mitzvahs and half sins. There's no question about that. In other words, he's not fooling himself. Humility doesn't mean to fool yourself. It means that maybe maybe your sin is a very serious sin. Maybe, and maybe that's a cause for losing out in certain things. But here we're talking about Rabba considering himself a Beinoni. And if we're translating Beinoni to mean half sins and half mitzvahs, it's impossible for us to allow that, to believe Rabba fooled himself in his humility and he believed he has half sins and half mitzvahs. That's not what humility means. That's like a foolish way of thinking. That's not being humble. Humble doesn't mean, oh yeah, I've done such terrible sins, and really you didn't, but you're convincing yourself, I'm terrible on this. That's not what humble is. Now, there is a term that's used, chet, sin. The word chet means sin. It also means chisaron. Chet means missing something. And that's commonly the way we understand with tzaddikim or with righteous people, if they consider that they might have sinned, we often understand it to mean that they didn't actually do a sin, but they missed out in something. They could have done something better, and they didn't do it as good as they could have. And so when we use the term chet for a tzaddik, we often mean that he missed out in an opportunity that he could have done a little better, a little more, and he missed out. He could have encouraged his community to do something better. He could have used his talent in a stronger way, emphasized something more, and because he didn't, so it's considered chet. He sinned, not the English word sin. It means he didn't do as much as he could. He missed out. He was chet, meaning chisaron. He missed out in something. And that's often the term. So again, getting back to what we're talking about here in Tanya, we are saying here that a Beinani is obviously not someone who has half sins and half mitzvahs, and Rabbah is definitely not considering himself someone who has half mitzvahs and half sins, because that's not, even if you want to say he was humble, he wasn't, wasn't going to lie to himself. That would be like lying to himself to say he has half sins. Now, then we also mentioned that when a person sins, he's called a wicked person. When a person does tshuva, he's called a righteous person. And when is the time that a person would be called a Beinani? If it's before he does the tshuva, the Talmud says that person is called a rasha. If after he does the tshuva, he repents, then he's called a tzaddik. And we had a source for that. Believe it or not, there's a source where it says that if a person marries someone on the condition that he is a tzaddik, we are nervous that might actually be a valid marriage. He would need, if he wants to marry someone else, or if she wants to marry someone else, they would both need a divorce, because that marriage would actually be potentially a valid marriage. Of course, there were witnesses, and he gave her something of value, more than about a dime, at least a dime's worth or so. That would be considered a valid marriage, on the condition that I am a tzaddik. Imagine that. It could be a valid marriage, and even though you know that person did sins, you've seen some of the things that person has done, and nevertheless, it's considered a valid marriage. Why? Because it's possible for one moment he had a repentance in his heart, and that repentance will make him into a tzaddik gomor. It's called a tzaddik gomor, a complete tzaddik. So that causes us to have to rethink what is the Beinani, what is this intermediate person? He can't be a tzaddik, and he can't be a rasha. And when would that moment be? Now, we also mentioned that even a rabbinic law, if a person transgresses, he's called a rasha, it's called wicked. And even if a person could have protested and they didn't protest, they're called wicked, or rasha. And we also mentioned that there is a mitzvah in the Torah to study Torah, which is what we're doing. And if a person is mevatel that mitzvah, that means if a person wastes time, which we're all guilty of, we're called a rasha. So it seems that it's quite hard to. It seems impossible. Where is this Beinani gonna fit? Just missing the sin of bittul Torah would cause a person to be a rasha, and it must be that a Beinani, this intermediate person, is going to be someone that doesn't even waste time. He is a person that doesn't even have the sin of bittul Torah. And let's start over there. the in came, and if so, we are in chapter 1 of the Tanya, and not sure which print you have, but we're in the word the in came. If you have the official Tanya, the way it was without the English.
Rabbi Smith?
Yes.
So it seems as though the description of a Rasha or a tzaddik, there's no room for shades of gray. There's no in between.
Right.
You miss an opportunity, you're a Rasha. It doesn't, I'm a Chas v'shalom, but why is it that way? Then by the application of those rules, there is no such thing as a Beinani.
That's our question. That's exactly what's bothering us.
Okay.
So that is the problem. We are in the Tanya on page 10, in the actual print of the original Tanya, on the second line. The in kain, and if so, al karchach, against your will, you must say, habeinani, the intermediate person, ein boy afilu avain bittul Torah. He doesn't even have the sin of bittul Torah, which is a sin that is so common, and it's so hard to be careful from. But the Beinani doesn't even have this sin. Umishum hachi, and because of this, ta'a Rabba be'atzmai, Rabba made a mistake in himself, loymar shehu Beinani, saying that he is a Beinani, he is an intermediate person. The reason he could make such a mistake is because a Beinani is someone that doesn't have any sins. And if a Beinani doesn't have any sins, so Rabbah was not too far off. Even if he's a tzaddik, but making a mistake and thinking he's a Beinani, in action, in practice, it's more or less the same, it seems like. Now we have to figure out what a tzaddik is then, because if a Beinani is someone that doesn't have sins, so it must be that a tzaddik is nothing to do with action. It must be that a tzaddik is something even greater than not having any physical sin in his actions, because a Beinani already doesn't have any sins in his actions. So the tzaddik must be even on a higher level than that. So it's not really connected to his physical actions. A tzaddik is obviously going to be something greater than just having actions. The Beinani is the one who doesn't have any physical sins with actions. A tzaddik for sure doesn't have that. A tzaddik is going to be some other element that's going to make him called a tzaddik. Now, the Alter Rebbe has here on the side a statement from the Zohar that he asks a question. It's called a Hagah, like a note on the side. And in this note, the Alter Rebbe brings a discussion from the Zohar. And he says, in this that it says in the Zohar, on the third division of the Zohar on page 231, Kol shemamuatin avinoisov, whoever his sins are minimal, he is called a tzaddik. And this is a story that the Zohar brings that Rav Hamnuna asked Elijah. This is a story in the Zohar that Rav Hamnuna asked Elijah, and he told him that the reason, or I don't know if he asked him, he told him, he says the reason that there's in this world, you have a tzaddik that has bad things happening to him, and a Rasha, a wicked person that good things are happening to him, is because the tzaddik has a small amount of sins, so he's getting his punishment in this world. And the Rasha that has some good deeds, so he's getting some of his reward in this world. That's what Rav Hamnuna had sold to Elijah. So we see that there seems to be a source that a tzaddik could be someone that has some sins. So the Alter Rebbe answers, He she'elas Rav Hamnuna le'Eliyahu. This is the question that Rav Hamnuna was asking to Eliyahu if this is correct. So in other words, it says it like a statement, but it really is a question. And Rav Hamnuna and Elijah answers him. And Elijah says that it's not so. So according to the way it looks is that Rav Hamnuna is saying this as a fact, but the way Elijah answers him, he explains that that is not the correct terminology, and a tzaddik is someone that doesn't have any sins whatsoever. And we will also see, as in the actual chapter of that we're studying, not on the side note, that it'll discuss this idea, because it is the common view of most people is that a tzaddik has majority mitzvahs and a small amount of sins, and a Beinani is a person who's half and half. So that mistaken way of thinking, there seems to be some sources for it. We just found a source now in the Zohar, and soon we're going to see that there are some sources for such a approach. So the Alter Rebbe is going to have to explain why it does seem like that's correct. Here in the Zohar, the Alter Rebbe explains that this was a question and it wasn't the final conclusion. But we'll soon see that there are some other sources as well. Does anyone have any questions?